Let's talk about a very, very old piece of paper. A document so famous, Nicolas Cage once stole it in a movie, which, let's be honest, is probably the most action it has seen in the last century. I'm talking, of course, about the Declaration of Independence. Today, we treat it like a sacred relic, a piece of political scripture written by demigods in powdered wigs. But if you blow off the historical dust and actually read it, you'll find something much more interesting. It's not a holy text. It's the world's most consequential breakup letter. It's a carefully crafted, exhaustively detailed, surprisingly dramatic message that essentially says, "Dear King, it's not me, it's you. It's definitely you. And we're leaving. Also, we're keeping the dog." This document, approved on July 4th, 1776, a date now synonymous with fireworks and questionable hot dog eating contests, was a colossal gamble. Imagine getting so fed up with your landlord that you don't just move out, you declare your apartment a sovereign nation and dare him to do something about it. That's basically what the 13 American colonies did. They didn't just want a few rules changed, they wanted a complete and total split from the most powerful empire on the planet. And to do that, they needed to convince their fellow colonists, the world, and perhaps even themselves, that this insane plan was not only necessary but also just. This wasn't just a declaration. It was a public relations masterpiece, designed to start a revolution. So, how did they do it? They didn't just scribble, "We're out," on a napkin and nail it to the palace door. No. They wrote an eloquent, philosophical, and incredibly accusatory document that laid out their entire case. So, what was life like before the big breakup? Imagine a very large, dysfunctional family. Britain was the overbearing parent, living thousands of miles away, who only called when it needed money. The 13 colonies were the surly teenagers, who felt they were old enough to make their own rules. For a long time, the relationship worked, sort of. Britain practiced something called salutary neglect. They mostly left the colonies alone as long as the money kept flowing. The colonists got used to independence, developing local governments and economies. Don't ask, don't tell governance. But then came the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War. It was expensive and globe-spanning. When it ended in 1763, Britain had a mountain of debt and vast new territory. Parliament saw the colonies as cash cows. Time to start milking. They began imposing new taxes, the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts. Like your dad charging rent after fixing the leaky roof. The colonists saw it differently. Their outrage wasn't just about money. It was about principle. They screamed, "No taxation without representation." The colonies had no members in Parliament. Colonists argued Parliament couldn't tax them. Britain said, "You're represented. Virtual representation. We're thinking about you, even without a seat at the table." That did not go over well. A virtual sandwich doesn't fill you up. Tension escalated. Britain sent soldiers, the Redcoats, to keep order. That led to clashes like the Boston Massacre, 1770. Then the Boston Tea Party, 1773. Britain hit back with the Intolerable Acts, shutting down Boston's port and stripping Massachusetts of self-governance. Point of no return. Not about pocket money anymore. A fight over control. The colonies stopped just complaining. They were organizing. By 1776, the situation was dire. The first shots had already been fired at Lexington and Concord a year earlier. The Second Continental Congress was meeting in Philadelphia, trying to figure out what to do. It was the ultimate group project from hell. Some delegates, like John Dickinson of Pennsylvania, wanted reconciliation. Others, like John Adams of Massachusetts, shouted, "Independence now!" It was chaos. After months of debate and a push from Thomas Paine's common sense, they decided to make it official. On June 11, 1776, Congress appointed a committee of 5 to draft a declaration. John Adams, the fiery lawyer from Massachusetts; Benjamin Franklin, the scientist and diplomat from Pennsylvania; Roger Sherman, the practical shoemaker-turned-judge from Connecticut; Robert R. Livingston, the wealthy New Yorker; Thomas Jefferson, the tall, quiet 33-year-old Virginian; Adams pushed Jefferson to write the first draft. "You can write 10 times better than I can," Adams said. Jefferson holed up in a rented room in Philadelphia and got to work. He didn't invent these ideas out of thin air. He was more a brilliant DJ than a composer, mixing Enlightenment hits. He drew on the Virginia Declaration of Rights by George Mason. He channeled John Locke, who argued governments are based on consent, natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Jefferson swapped property for the pursuit of happiness. After about 2 weeks, Jefferson presented his draft to the committee. Franklin and Adams made minor edits. Then they took it to the floor of Congress, editing by committee. For 2 long, hot days, delegates picked it apart, word by word. They toned down dramatic language and cut an entire section condemning the slave trade and blaming King George. A painful compromise to appease South Carolina and Georgia. A grim sign of deep contradictions at the nation's heart. Let's zoom in on the most famous part of the whole document, the second paragraph. This is the mission statement, the philosophical heart of the entire enterprise. It starts with that blockbuster line. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness." Stop right there. This is one of the most powerful and revolutionary sentences ever written. By calling these truths self-evident, Jefferson was saying they don't need to be proven. They just are. It's a mic drop of a political argument. The idea that all men are created equal was, frankly, ludicrous in the context of 1776, a world dominated by kings, aristocrats, rigid social hierarchies. Equality was not the norm. It was a radical, utopian dream. And as we'll get to, the men who wrote this sentence didn't even apply it to everyone in their own society. But by putting that phrase front and center, they planted a seed, an ideal the nation would spend centuries struggling to live up to. Then comes the next bombshell, the purpose of government. Governments are created to secure these rights, deriving just powers from the consent of the governed. Power flows up from the people, not down from God to king. The government is not the master, it is the servant. And what happens if the servant becomes a terrible, abusive master? The Declaration has an answer, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. It's a political fire alarm. Break the glass, pull the lever, overthrow a government that betrays their trust, empowering and slightly terrifying. After laying out that beautiful, high-minded philosophy, the Declaration takes a sharp turn. Okay, now that we've covered the theory, let's get to the receipts. 27 grievances against King George III. This is the bulk of the document, and it's the part most people skip. It reads like a modern-day Twitter thread from someone with a really bad customer service experience. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. They lay out the political, the economic, and the military. He refused necessary laws. He has refused his assent to laws. He meddled with justice. He has made judges dependent on his will alone. Taxes imposed without permission, that no taxation without representation thing. It's a systematic dismantling of the king's authority, portraying him as a tyrant bent on absolute tyranny. He sent swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance, standing armies in peacetime without consent. He cut off their trade with the world. He forced captured American sailors to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren. It gets darker, accusing the king of inciting domestic insurrections, a veiled reference to enslaved people rising, and the racist line about merciless Indian savages. It's deeply ugly, revealing the era's dehumanizing attitudes. The grievance list is a powerful piece of propaganda, but also a flawed, revealing historical record. It tells us who they were, and what they were willing to ignore. After all the philosophy and the furious list of complaints, we arrive at the conclusion, the formal, legalistic pronouncement of independence. That these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. They are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown. All political connection is and ought to be totally dissolved. That's it. The cord is cut. The unfriending is complete. This is a declaration of sovereignty. They can levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, do all acts and things independent states may of right do. Bold words carried immense personal risk. The document ends. With a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. These men were committing treason. Failure meant capture, trial, execution. John Hancock signed in large bold letters, "A defiant act. Come and get me." On July 4, 1776, Congress adopted the text. John Dunlap printed about 200 broadsides. They were distributed across the colonies and sent to the army. The signed parchment we picture wasn't signed until August 2nd, but July 4th was the point of no return. The breakup letter had been sent. Now they had to win the fight. So, the colonists dropped this bombshell of a document. Did the world even notice? In the colonies, it was a huge deal. Readings met with cheering crowds, bonfires, and the tearing down of royal symbols. In New York City, a giant lead statue of King George was pulled down and melted into 42,088 musket balls. Ironic and practical. Across the Atlantic, England published it, then sneered. To them, it was propaganda from ungrateful traitors. And yes, they pointed out the hypocrisy on slavery. But in Europe, especially France, it mattered. Smarting from defeat, the French saw opportunity. The Declaration's bold claims, plus American victories like Saratoga, helped bring French money, ships, and soldiers. Diplomatically, it worked. History's most successful GoFundMe pitch. Beyond the war, it became a model text, echoed in the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and in independence movements across Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Africa. A universal symbol against oppression, even when America fell short of its own words. Now the uncomfortable elephant in the room. All men are created equal came with a massive unwritten asterisk. Jefferson, who penned those words, enslaved more than 175 human beings. The ideals were revolutionary, the reality deeply hypocritical. Equality wasn't extended to enslaved Africans, treated as property. Many sought freedom by siding with the crown. Women, bound by coverture, couldn't own property, sign contracts, or vote. Abigail Adams warned to remember the ladies. Change came 144 years later. Native Americans appear only as a slur. Independence opened floodgates of broken treaties, removals, and violence. For many, American independence ended their own. So here we are, on December 9, 2025, nearly 250 years after this document was written. Why are we still talking about it? Is it just a historical artifact to be admired behind glass? No. The reason the Declaration endures is because it's not a relic, it's an argument, a living, breathing document whose meaning is still being fought over today. Its power lies not in what it was, but in what it promises: equality, liberty, self-government, the measuring stick against which the United States has been judged ever since. American history is one long struggle to close the gap between the ideals of the Declaration and the reality of American life. Abolitionists like Frederick Douglass asked, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July?" He called it a day of injustice and cruelty, not rejecting the ideals, but demanding the nation live up to them. Women's suffrage reframed it at Seneca Falls. All men and women are created equal. Dr. King called the Declaration a promissory note, a check that had come back insufficient funds. He was there to demand the nation make good on it. The Declaration is not a simple story of heroes and villains. It's complicated, messy, deeply human, written by flawed men who set forth an ideal they couldn't or wouldn't fully realize. But they gave future generations the language to demand fulfillment. It's a tool, a weapon, and a challenge. It reminds us that rights aren't given, they are claimed, that governments must be held accountable, and that building a more perfect union is never finished. The story of the Declaration isn't over. It's a constantly unfolding narrative that we are all still writing today. And in the end, that is the real story they didn't teach you. The Declaration of Independence is not an answer, it's a question.